Hi guys, and welcome to the first ever 5-Minute Friday. It's a new strand on the channel with shorter, snappier films. As the name implies, I'll aim to release them on Fridays, though don't be mad if I can't keep exactly to a weekly schedule. I'll be looking at the life of British heroes, most of whom are long forgotten by popular history. We'll be learning about obscure units of the British Army and some of the smaller, less well-known battles. The subjects will bounce around between eras and continents, but they will be interesting tales packed with daring do and good old-fashioned British pluck. I'm really looking forward to researching and writing them. And so let's crack on with today's story. It's a good one. All of us military history geeks know Richard Sharpe, the fictitious rifleman who shot, bludgeoned and shagged his way through the Napoleonic Wars. He was a ranker who won a commission for saving Sir Arthur Wellesley's life. But have you ever heard of John Shipp? Well, if you haven't, then stay tuned because this guy's story will blow your mind. Shipp was a Sussex lad, born in 1785, and at an early age his head was turned by a Royal Artillery recruiting party visiting his village. From that moment on he was army-barmy. He didn't have to wait long to join up though, because at just 10 years of age he signed up as a drummer boy with the 22nd Regiment of Foot, the Cheshires. They were later dispatched to South Africa, and his first taste of action was against a surprising foe, baboons. He was part of a detachment that chased them out of their camp, only to discover that they were actually a worthy enemy. As he said in his memoirs, one old grey-headed one who we'd seen before and nicknamed Father Murphy was seen distributing his orders and planning their attack. A scream from Father Murphy signalled the start of the encounter. A host of baboons under his command rolled down enormous stones upon us, so that we were obliged to give up the contest or some of us must inevitably have been killed. They actually followed us to our doors, shouting their victory cry. How amazing is that? I knew baboons could be dangerous, but I didn't know they could outwit a company of British infantry. Soon afterwards, Shipp met and fell for an attractive South African Boer girl called Sabina. He deserted to join her family, but the Provost Marshal was having none of that nonsense, and Shipp was arrested at gunpoint outside Cape Town. He was sentenced to 999 lashes, which would surely have killed him. But luckily his CO seems to have been a decent chap, and let him off with a reprimand. The regiment was then sent to India, and his career could begin in earnest. He was now 18 and was quickly promoted from drummer boy to corporal. He was also taught to read and write by a friendly captain, which is important if you want to become an officer. In 1803, the Second Anglo-Maratha War kicked off. At the end of 1804, Shipp, now a sergeant, took part in the storming of the fortified town of Deeg in what is now Rajasthan. He recalled, "Fortunately for us, the whole of the enemy's great guns were elevated too much, owing to which the shots passed over our heads. Within 50 or 60 paces from the breach, I received a matchlock ball in the head, which dropped me to the ground, the blood flowing profusely. Our opponents fought hard to resist our entrance, throwing immense stones, pieces of trees, bundles of straw set on fire, stink pots, etc. But resistance was in vain. We were determined to conquer." Shipp obviously had great big cojones, and he developed a taste for assaulting heavily defended walls. In early 1805, he volunteered to lead the Forlorn Hope, they were the first men into the breach, at the siege of Bharatpur. He later wrote of the experience, "I went to my post at the head of the column with my little band of heroes, 12 volunteers from the different corps of the army. Reader, you may believe me when I assure you that at this critical juncture, everything else was forgotten in the enthusiasm of the moment, except the contemplation of the honourable post confided to me. What? Thought I, a youth at the head of an Indian army? I began to think it presumption when so many more experienced soldiers filled the ranks behind. I thought that every eye was upon me, and I did not regret the pitchy darkness of the night which hid my blushing countenance." But the breach in that war wasn't what the men of the Forlorn Hope had been led to expect. It had been repaired. Not only that, it was lined with sharp stakes and some sort of mechanised spear contraption. Shipp said it was utterly impossible to approach these formidable weapons. In the meantime, small spears or darts were hurled at us, and stones, lumps of wood, stink pots and bundles of lighted straw thrown upon us. In the midst of this tumult, I got one of my legs through a hole so that I could see into the interior of the fort. The people were like a swarm of bees. In a moment I felt something seize my foot. I pulled with all my might and at last succeeded in disengaging my leg, but leaving my boot behind me. Our establishing ourselves on this breach in sufficient force to dislodge this mass of spearmen was physically impossible. Our poor fellows were mowed down like cornfields without the slightest hope of success. Gosh, that sounds horrific, doesn't it? I can only imagine the fear when one of the defenders grabbed his leg. You would assume they're going to cut it off. So for most men, leading one forlorn hope in their military career would have been exceptional. But despite the bloody failure of the first attack, Shipp volunteered again. The second assault was equally as disastrous. But unperturbed, Shipp volunteered for a third time. And on the 21st of February 1805, he prepared to lead the final assault on the walls. As he wrote in his autobiography, "I had made up my mind that I could not in all human probability escape for a third time. But he alone who created life can destroy it. I had not been on the breach more than 5 minutes when I was struck with a large shot on my back, thrown down from the top of the bastion, which made me lose my footing, and I was rolling sideways when I was brought up by a bayonet of one of our grenadiers passing through my shoe. Into the fleshy part of the foot and under the great toe it went. My fall carried everything down that was under me. The man who assisted me in getting up was at that moment shot dead. His name was Courtney, also of the 22nd in the Light Company. I regained my place time enough to see poor Lieutenant Templar, who had planted the colour on top, cut to pieces by one of the enemy rushing out and cutting him almost in two as he lay flat upon the face on top of the breach. The man was immediately shot dead and trotted to the bottom of the ditch. I had not been in my new place long when a stink pot or other earthen pot containing combustible matter fell on my pouch, in which were about 50 rounds of ball cartridges. The whole exploded. My pouch I never saw more, and I was precipitated from the top to the bottom of the bastion. How I got there in safety I know not, but when I came to myself I found I was lying under the breach with my legs in the water. I was much hurt from the fall, my face was severely scorched, my clothes much burnt, and all the hair on the back of my head burnt off. I for a time could not tell where I was. I crawled to the opposite side of the bank and seated myself by a soldier of the same company who did not know me. I sat here, quite unable to move, for some little time, till a cannonball struck in the ditch, which knocked the mud all over me. This added greatly to the elegance of my appearance, and in this state I contrived, somehow or other, to crawl out of the ditch. At this moment the retreat was sounded, after every mortal effort had been made in vain. The British had now suffered a terrible 3,000 casualties trying to capture Barrackpore, and it was finally decided to give up. In the general orders that followed, Shipp found himself promoted and commissioned as an ensign in His Majesty's 65th Regiment of Foot. Knowing he would struggle financially, Lord Lake, the general in charge, gave him 2 camels and a horse as a present. It's a decent bloke. He then organised another promotion for him, this time to full lieutenant in the 76th Regiment. I think this rapid series of promotions shows you how much Shipp's bravery had impressed the entire army right up to the top. But Shipp had suffered a myriad of wounds during the siege, including a deep gash across his forehead which caused excruciating headaches and dizziness. Reading between the lines of his autobiography, it almost seems that the battle scarred him mentally, causing what today you might recognise as PTSD. He said, "Scarcely a night passed that I did not dream of hairbreadth escapes in the imminent deadly breach. I was fighting my battles over again. The report of a gun would startle me dreadfully, but with excellent constitutional care and avoiding drink, I soon recovered." Shipp then returned to the UK and joined his new regiment in Wakefield. But it was here he let himself down and fell into the trap of many officers who had come up from the ranks. He lived beyond his means, got deeply into debt and was forced to sell his commission. Now, before you stop listening, assuming that this is the end of the story, think again. For a man like John Shipp, this was just the beginning. After finding himself with no money and homeless in London, he decided to re-enlist. This time he opted for a cavalry regiment, the 24th Dragoons. While doing his basic training, he was recognised by an officer who had served in India, and he was quickly promoted to the rank of sergeant and sent back to India to serve. In India, he quickly became the regimental sergeant major and then, shockingly, was awarded yet another commission, this time as an ensign in the 1st Battalion of the 87th Regiment of Foot, also known as the Princess of Wales' own Irish, the 2nd Battalion of which performed sterling service in the Peninsula, by the way. Often officers up from the ranks could be given a hard time by their colleagues, and also by the men they commanded. But Shipp found his reception very warm in the regiment. In fact, he wrote this: "I immediately sought the acting adjutant, from whom, after I had announced my name and delivered my credentials, I received every politeness and attention. He introduced me at once to the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Miller, C.B., who received me in the most cordial manner, congratulated me on my appointment, and expressed himself much pleased at my accession to the regiment. All the officers of the corps flocked around me and greeted me in the most handsome and friendly manner. This liberal conduct was the more gratifying to my feelings, as I must confess I did not anticipate any such friendly reception. I was well aware of the existing prejudice and the caution with which officers promoted from the ranks were usually received, but no such prejudice prevailed in this distinguished corps. On the contrary, had I been the son of a duke, my reception could not have been more flattering and friendly." I mean, that's nice, isn't it? Because it kind of goes against people's understanding of what it was like to be commissioned from the ranks. In 1815, his new regiment was sent to fight the Gurkhas in Nepal. Shipp was soon very impressed by his enemy, and at the Battle of Makwanpur, he had a chance to prove his own bravery in single combat against a Gurkha commander called Kisna Rana Bahadur. Shipp wrote of the encounter: "He was a strong, powerful man protected by 2 shields. From this gentleman there was no escape. Unfortunately for me, I had my old sword with me, which I had 2 or 3 days before put in good shaving order. With this I always obliged to act on the defensive till I could catch my formidable opponent off his guard. He cut, I guarded, he thrust, I parried, until he became aggravated and set to work with that impetuosity and determination pretty generally understood by the phrase hammer and tongs, in the course of which he nearly cut my poor sword in pieces. At last I found he was winded, but I could see nothing of the fellow except his black face peeping above one shield and his feet peeping under the other. So I thought I would give him a cut, 5 across his lower extremities, but he would not stand still a moment. He cut as many capers as a French dancing master, till I was quite out of patience with his folly. I did not like to quit my man, so I tried his other extremities, but he would not stand still. All I could do, at length I made a feint at his toes to cut to them. Down went his shield from his face to save his legs. Up went the edge of my sword, smack under his chin. In endeavouring to get away from which, he threw his head back, which nearly tumbled off, and down he fell. And I assure you, reader, I was not sorry for it, for he was a most unsociable neighbour. I don't know whether I had a right or not, but I took the liberty of taking his sword. Gold crescent, turban chain and large shield. The latter I sported on my left arm during the action. And it was fortunate for me that I did, for I found that the shield was ball-proof, and I should have been severely wounded had I been deprived of this trophy." How's that for a brilliant description of hand-to-hand combat? I haven't read too many like that, especially sort of sword against sword. It was like something from medieval times, wasn't it? I loved the way he kind of waited for the guy to get exhausted and then went in for the kill. Sort of Rocky Balboa or Muhammad Ali style. After the Gurkha War, Shipp saw more action in the Maratha and Pindari War of 1817-18 and was then promoted to lieutenant on the 5th of July 1821. But again, things went wrong for brave Shipp. Unfortunately, he was no Richard Sharpe when it came to politics and climbing the slippery pole of promotion. After a bizarre incident involving the purchase of racehorses and some disastrous bets, he was court-martialed and discharged from the service. But he was still granted a pension by the East India Company for his great service previous to that. It must have been a strange time of change for him. As he says himself, "From the age of 9 to 41, he said 10 earlier in his book, I had now been in the army, a period of 32 years. In the course of those services I had received 6 matchlock ball wounds. 1 through the forehead just above my eyes, which had so impaired my sight that I've been obliged to use glasses for some years past. 2 on the top of my head, from which have at different times been extracted 16 pieces of bone. These 2 wounds at every change of the weather cause a most excruciating headache. 1 in the fleshy part of the right arm, 1 through the forefinger of my left hand. Of this finger I have entirely lost the use, and I am still obliged to nurse it with great care. Several pieces of bone having been extracted from it, and some splinters, as I fear, being still remaining. 1 in the fleshy part of my right leg, I'd also received a flesh wound in my left shoulder with several other slighter wounds, not worth mentioning. His amazing military career was over, but his fascinating life continued as he branched out into writing books and plays, served in the police and ran a workhouse even in Liverpool. Eventually, at the age of 50, Shipp died in Liverpool, leaving a widow and children. He'd had a remarkable life, joining the army at 10 years old, or 9, whichever part of the book you believe, and then twice rising from the ranks to become an officer. John Shipp, sir, I salute you, a true British hero. So I hope you enjoyed that short film, the first of our 5-minute Fridays. I know it's a bit longer, but anyway, you get the point. If you want more films like this, then subscribe and comment below to let me know what sort of subjects you're keen to know more about. In the meantime, try not to engage any Gurkha chiefs in a sword fight, and definitely don't get involved in any dodgy horse racing scandals.